we are going to learn in relation with the Hamilton C2, where it seems the model will be C3 ventilator. So, halos similar lang yung ano nila, interface no, ng C3, C2 Hamilton. So, in no particular brand of ventilator, so we need to apply the concept, what we have learned in the uh, ventilator management, particularly setting the tidal volume no, as we observe the commercial video of the Hamilton. So, so you can notice that the ventilator has an auto mode, no? So once you turn on the ventilator, the Hamilton, it has what we call a technology. The modern technology or the microprocessor compute the ideal body weight. So remember, as we learned before on the PowerPoint, that ideal body weight is not the actual kilogram or kilo weight of the patient. So hindi siya yung kilograms na wini-weigh natin. So you should compute the ideal body weight or IBW. Some literature or some book define as the predicted body weight. So it does not mean if you are 65 kilograms on the weighing scale, your predicted or ideal body weight is 65 kilograms. So we need to base to the formula the male ideal body weight based on height, and the equation or how to derive based on the equation we studied on the slides is based on a US or metric system, no? So it's on pounds. So what is important in identifying the ideal body weight or the predicted body weight of the patient is number one, the sex, no? So if the patient is female or the patient is male, so different ideal body weight, not ang kilograms ha. Again, if you're in the clinical practice, do not base predicted values or the ideal body weight values in the kilograms. Magkakamali at magkakamali kayo sa settings pa lang ng initial ng ventilator if you base it on the kilograms. In the demo video of this Hamilton, no? So you notice that you enter the height. So the height is part of the equation, as you notice on the early lesson, no? On ventilator management, that once we compute the ideal body weight of the female or the male, so we convert the height into inches. I may stand corrected, no? If you can still recall, it's on uh, height in inches, no? So you correlate the formula on tidal volume on how we derive or compute as a respiratory therapist the ideal body weight of our patient. So it tends that this technology of the ventilator, you need only to input the ideal body weight based on height. But there is pros and cons because of this, di ba? Medyo high-tech na siya. But we need to do the basic why, because there are some consideration, even though the technology or the microprocessors of modern ventilator can predict the value, but we need to consider the different cases of the patient. If you review or recall on the tidal volume part, no, in the ventilator management lesson, it is very important to determine if the patient is ARDS, if the patient is COPD, if the patient is asthmatic, or if the patient is a normal patient. So academically, the computation is based on the factors that if a normal patient, the ml of the tidal volume is based on 8 to 10 kilograms. If it is on the more on ARDS, it's 5 to 6 is conservative. If the patient is COPD or a case of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, so it's more on a higher tidal volume. The factor or the fixed factor to compute the tidal volume is on the decision of the respiratory therapies based on the patient condition. Pag yan in-enter mo dito sa ventilator, the ventilator seems to be programmed on a normal lang. So, as a default, the microprocessor of the ventilator will compute to the first statement of computing the tidal volume, which is a normal lang. So, yun, nagkakaroon ka, you make further damage to the patient lang. Kasi okay lang pag ang patient hook sa ventilator is under normal condition. But the pros and cons of modern technology, no, that's why may RT tayo. Kasi sa sobrang high-tech, the default program of the manufacturer of the ventilator is based on 8 to 10 ml per kilogram. So if you input the data, kasi sabi mo high-tech yung ventilator mo, so you're causing further damage to your patient because the default program of the microprocessor is a patient with unhealthy lungs. So, as on the clinical practice, may mga pasyente na may ARDS. So, ARDS means acute adult respiratory distress syndrome and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which has different factors in terms of tidal volume. So sa tidal volume pa lang, it so happen na ang ganda ng ventilator, it's modern, but the default program of the manufacturer, the Hamilton, usually is based on a normal lung of an adult patient. So pag ARDS mo, patay ka. So you enter the height, then the ventilator will predict the normal ideal body weight base. So maka automatic compute siya ng predicted ideal body weight, and then the ventilator can give the tidal volume, but in that case the ventilator will give the normal computation for a normal lung. Remember, most of the patient we put here in a clinical scenario are with patient with ARDS or ARDS and COPD. So dun pa lang sa automated na tidal volume, you are making damage to the lung. So better as a student to be able to memorize the formula or equation in predicting the tidal volume based on the ideal body weight, no? So we give emphasis, no, not the actual kilos of the patient, but you need to derive the male and female ideal body weight. So let's continue. So that is the ideal body weight. So this is what this is the meaning or ang emphasis ng demo video is once you entered the data in the ventilator, the last patient data will be stored to the memory of the ventilator. So most of the data you entered from the previous patient will be recorded, and once you turn on the ventilator for next use, the data na nagre-reflect is based on your last patient. So double check always kasi pag you hook to another patient, so each patient has different lung condition, different tidal volumes, different parameters. So be careful that to double check the ventilator for next patient hooking na different ang parameters kasi the last parameter stored in your ventilator is based also always on the last patient na nakahook. Okay, let's continuously observe. So always press or select new patient for safety purposes. Kasi pag if you on, the default will be, again, I repeat, it will be based on the last previous patient data. Pero always set to a new patient. So if you're still on the parameters or in the pre-operation pa lang na sineset up ang ventilator, always choose or better to choose new patient. And you need also to compute manually, no? Hindi mo, wag mo i-base sa computer kasi sabihin mo millennial age na tayo. We don't need this old school equations, but better to compute manually and memorize the formula of computing rather than relying to the microprocessors of your ventilator, because this technology needs also a human brain, no? Kaya nilagay ka as a respiratory therapist to control and manipulate ventilator, hindi ikaw ang kontrolin ng ventilator, because this ventilator are machines that is programmed based on a normal, again, based on a normal lung condition. So hindi alam ng, ewan ko, ng manufacturer, they don't manufacture the ventilator based on COPD, based on uh, ARDS case, based on asthmatic. Kaya nga as a respiratory therapist, you need to have a clinical eye to decide the proper parameters and adjust parameters. This incongruent sa case na paglalagyan ng ventilator. Remember that the default of the manufacturer was based on a normal lang. But clinically, we are hooking the ventilator on patient with lung disorders na complicated. So better always to calculate parameters manually, particularly nga sabi ko, yung tidal volume. So if you correlate or contrast the patient with the RDS, ang lalabas na computation based sa microprocessor ng ventilator is different because that is based on 8 to 10 kilograms ideal body weight. Hindi siya nag-interpolate sa ARDS, which is conservative or protective lung ventilation, which is 4 to 6 ml per kilograms, and then for COPD, which requires higher tidal volume. So ma-observe mo yan. You can contrast your manual computation based on a computer computation of your ventilator na nag-automatic, nag-input ka lang sa modern ventilator, but considering mali pala yung predicted values ng ventilator. So we are imposing alarms or setting the alarms in the ventilator? Is it logically necessary, or it is you don't need to or mind setting your parameters in the alarms? what is the importance of alarm parameters to your ventilator in correlation with your ventilator management. As we discussed on the previous introduction or topic on ventilator management, di ba? We're preventing barotrauma and volumotrauma, di ba? Because there are two classification of the ventilator. It can be a pressure control or a volume control. But there are studies that the uh, pressure controlled ventilation develop or promotes lesser barotrauma or what we call less siya na makakasira or can create less damage to the lung because the peak airway pressure can be maintained of less than 35 centimeters of water. What does it mean? The pressure of the airway it's more than 35 centimeters of water. It can cause barotrauma. So your alarm parameters can limit, no? Hindi lang siya nagsisense that the pressure of the lungs is more than 35, but there is an augmentation or what we call there will be a cut-off of the pressure. Pag na-reach niya yung peak airway pressure, more than 35 centimeters of water, so the ventilator pressure will be shut down. So these alarm parameters is also what we call setting the limit of the pressure drive. So if you set the pressure drive maintaining the normal physiology of 35 centimeters of water, uh, it will have a beneficial effect on your patient. It means that your patient will have less barotrauma because of these alarm parameters. So hindi lang sila sensors or they are not only what we call indicators for the limits, but they are also augmenting or terminating higher pressure that goes to your lungs. So the alarm will be activated, but also the limit of the pressure will also set, the microprocessor will sense the limit of higher pressure na hindi madideliver sa lungs so that barotrauma because of high pressures can be prevented because of these alarm parameters. So that's the purpose of alarm limits nyo. So digitally, you can navigate it by touching certain limit to your tidal volume, to your peak airway pressure, to your minute ventilation. So these such terms are new to you. We are more on clinical approach, no? You need to apply the theories in the ventilator actual settings, no? So kayo, back up na kayo ng fundamentals ng knowledge as we discussed before sa PowerPoint that the ventilator can cause also barotrauma. So how can we prevent barotrauma? By setting your alarm limits, particularly your peak airway pressure. So that's your PIP, you know. So many consideration, you need to compute also your minute volume. So that will be discussed later on your ventilator management. So these are only the basic or the intro of your setting the parameters, particularly in this model, no, the Hamilton. So these are the advanced or the add-on, uh, what you call features of the modern ventilator. In our time, so analog siya, but now it's always on touchscreen. So SAI is one maneuver that modern practice na hindi na pinapractice ang SAI. In SAI, so we are putting SAI in a zero mode, no? Before, way back to analog ventilator like the MA1, the Bennett MA1, SAI is not imposed because a SAI cycle, example, in every three SAI in every 60 cycles of breath, something like that. So meaning sa side, there is a positive pressure na nilalagay sa lungs in every cycle. Example, if you have one cycle of breath and every 60 breaths, there is always a